Okay, welcome to another basic moves for DCS World lesson. Today we're looking at something really simple, Ops ATIS. So adding a airport terminal information service into your missions adds a bit of immersion. It's also pretty useful for writing down QNHs, weathers, things like that to give your players a bit more realism. So let's dive straight into the mission editor and I'll show you what I've got set up so far. So very simple, bit of moose scripting. I've put a couple of units down, and of course I am at mission start via an asset load loading moose, and then I'm going to load my ATIS script that we're going to write. And again, I've added it time more than, make it 4 seconds, and then do script file, and we'll do our ATIS lesson.lua, which we haven't written yet, but we'll do that. So I've got that all ready to go. Of course, just to test it, I've added a test Harrier in here that's running on the ramp, and to make it easy, I've pre-loaded in COM2 the ATIS frequency I intend to use, which is 126.8, and it'll be at Vaziani. And this little helicopter here that's set to uncontrolled is what we call a radio relay. So we'll have a bit of a talk about that as we write our script. So let's have a look at the classes guide to start with for Ops ATIS, and we can get a bit more of a idea. It's a pretty well described class. It's one of the older ones, and it's pretty easy to use. So we jump out into the classes guide. We have Ops ATIS, automatic terminal information service, fair enough. Wind direction, visibility, cloud coverage, temperature, dew point, pressure, rain, things like that. You can add tower frequencies in. It's got its own voice set, which is kept in the Moose voice files, which we've looked at. You can see a couple of sample videos on how it works, some example missions to steal some script from, and the location for the latest sound files. And we'll reiterate how you add sound files to your mission. Have a good read through it. It's pretty self-explanatory, but we'll just run through it and do one. So we're going to use Vaziani, and we're going to add a very simple few lines of code to get our ATIS working. It has subtitles that can come up if you have that set to display by using this SetSubtitleDuration. If you put it to 0, you'll get no subtitles, which is how I prefer to use it and use sound. You can tell it to use an active runway. A great example is this Nellis one, where due to air traffic control reasons, regardless of the wind, they'll use set runways for departure and arrival. So you can set that in there. So it won't look at the wind, it'll just use the standard runway configuration used in real life. You can add tower frequencies for your players. Pretty unusual in a ATIS, but you can do it. Nav aids you can add, also unusual in ATIS, but if you want to give your players some more information about the airport they're using without having to look up charts, you can add those in. There's a whole bunch of stuff on how to add sound files, which is a pretty good example, but we'll have a brief look at that. Marks on the F10 map are pretty handy. It'll display some marker there with some basic ATIS information, and we won't do that though, but we'll just, that's an option. And this option is a great one for servers using text-to-speech, and you're using the SRS function to output just basic text-to-speech, and you set a voice. And we'll have a look at what you need to do, but we won't look at using SRS, we'll just look at using the in-game sound files that are loaded into the mission. Here's some examples on how to do it. And that's the most basic example, and that's what we're sort of going to look at. Here's how you'd add tower frequencies and TACANs and things like that in to make the ATIS longer and more detailed, and a bit on how to add SRS. Righto, so let's dive in and start looking at writing our script. I've already configured it with a blank Lua source file, and we have lesson 9, Ops ATIS, basic method for DCS World, create an ATIS for Vaziani. All right, let's get straight in. So we have to name our ATIS something, so how about we just call it atisVaziani. And it can equal this function from adding an ATIS equals ATIS, capitalized, new, and then we've got some parameters that we're going to set. So we can copy that out and let's just drop that in our script. Okay, so ATIS new, Caucasus Batumi. Now we could change that to Vaziani and it would work just fine. We said we wanted to use 1286. There we go. Another way to do this, if you don't want to put these full names in, is we could do whatever in the mission editor, which if we duck back to that quickly, whatever this airport's called, when we display its information here in the name, if you use that name exactly with quotations in your script, for example, let's delete that out. Like that. That'll work just fine as well. So 2 ways of doing it. There's our frequency. And there's an option also to add radio modulation if you wanted to use your ATIS on FM for some bizarre reason. It defaults to AM, but it would look like this. Radio.modulation.FM, like that. But we're using AM, so let's keep it AM. Now you don't have to add this in because it defaults, but I'll just leave it in there. So there's our first line of our little ATIS script. And you really need to use a radio relay unit. You can only use a helicopter or an aircraft. You can't use ground units, as far as I'm aware. And the reason why is it allows for the radio function to work better in DCS. So an uncontrolled helicopter just works fine on the ramp, and that's generally what I use. So let's configure that again. So atisVaziani, and we want to set radio relay unit name. Okay. So we can poach that back out of the classes guide again because there's an example there. Save us writing it. So let's grab that out of there. Control C. And back here. Okay, I just set radio relay unit name, and this name here is the unit name, not the group name. So let's just jump back into the mission editor again and have a look what we named it. So I set a helicopter on the ramp, so Cobra, and radio relay Vaziani is its group name, but it's also its unit name. So let's just grab that out there, out of the pilot's name, and we will copy that into our script. In here. Right, now we've got that done. Let's look at that set subtitle duration and set it to 0 so we don't get subtitles. So it is set subtitle duration, and we'll set it to 0. And then if we want to run it, all we have to do is start that ATIS. So it'll be atisVaziani, start. And there we are. There's our atisVaziani on 128.6, and on the AM modulation, relaying through this helicopter that we've placed on the ramp that is set to uncontrolled. Now it is important to make it uncontrolled, otherwise the thing's going to be running and it looks pretty stupid, or it'll take off, one of the two. So I just place it uncontrolled and it works just fine. And we don't want subtitles, so we've got that set to 0, and we are starting the script. Now, generally each airport will have its own ATIS, so it's really easy to just grab what you created there and add another airport. And just change it all. Make sure you change the frequency. You'll have to place a separate radio relay unit for each airport so they don't conflict with each other. But exactly the same process would work, and you can populate your mission with an ATIS at the airfields that you're planning on using, and adds a bit of realism. So let's delete that out because we only need to look at one. Another thing we were going to talk about is if we didn't want to add our sound files in and use the internal DCS radio, we could use external radio using SRS, which works really well for server environments. And if you've got Flaming Chris 3 aircraft on there and you don't want the ATIS continually playing on there, which it will do if you're spamming a radio with a ATIS voice coming over the top. I'll just put it in and I'll show you what it looks like. So this would work on my system, and we'll just have a quick talk about how this would work. Okay, so that's something from another script I've written for our server environment. So basically I'm telling it to set SRS as its output, so it won't need any sound files in the mission. What the location of my SRS is, really important that you get these backslashes correct. You'll note there's 2 of them. It's not a /, it's a backslash. You specify the gender of the voice you're going to use, the voice, what country it's coming from, and if you like, you can put in a specific voice that you want to use. So in this case, Microsoft Zira. Now these voices have to be installed on your server or your computer that you're playing this mission on. And optionally, it defaults to 5002, is your SRS port. So that is important if you're running servers with multiple ports with different missions running. You want to make sure you specify where you want it to output on what SRS server. So that's something there. Let's just comment that out because it's a bit outside the scope of what we're doing. It's not so basic, it's more for server environments, but we'll comment that out. And what we need to do now is add our sound files to our mission. Now, in the classes guide, if you remember, there was a section in here on how to do it. So open the zip, drag and drop ATIS sound files into your mission file. Now, how do you drop into a mission file? Let's just have a quick look at it. If I bring up my missions, and I have my, let's just expand this a little bit, Moose ATIS mission. Now we'll just go in here. So whatever the name of the mission I saved, which is called Moose ATIS lesson, there it is. Okay, so Moose ATIS lesson, it's a MIS file, which we'd expect it to be. All we have to do is open it up by renaming it as a zip file. And it now becomes a zip. And then we can duck into that zip file. And you'll see I've already added the folder in here. So normally that folder won't be there. It'll just have a 10N folder, and then the mission, script, options, theater, warehouses. And that's what you'll see, those there. And all you have to do is download your, if I go to my downloads, so let's open that up in a new window, or not. Okay, there we go. And I've downloaded from the Moose website the Moose sound zip. If you go into it, you'll see there's AirBoss sounds, ATIS sounds, general sounds, range sounds. So we go into the ATIS sounds because that's the ones we want, and ATIS sound files. Now you can see that if I just copy that folder and drop it into our zip file, we've just opened that. So it will then just populate. So if we go back into our missions again and have a look at our zip file, I will have just dropped that ATIS sound files folder in. Now that's the default name for the folder. You can change it if you want, but I don't see any point. Drop it in. Once you've dropped it in, you can go in here and rename your ATIS lesson zip back to a MIS file. Right, now you can continue editing that. It doesn't matter. All you've done is save a folder in that inside that MIS file with the sounds you'll need to run ATIS. So it doesn't matter if you resave in the mission editor, that's fine. So let's have one quick review of the mission editor before we go and test our ATIS script and make sure it works. So over to the mission editor. All right, we have our radio relay Vaziani and the unit name. We can see it's uncontrolled. And we have just an aircraft to jump in and test. And I've got it take off from parking hot. And I've made sure I have a frequency in here for ATIS. Or I could just tune it up, but to save some time, we'll just put 1268 in there. And that's all we need. Check that our triggers are in. Loading Moose, that's there. And are we loading our script we just designed? ATIS lesson, that looks all right. And let's just save that file. Lesson, place it. Alrighty, let's go and test it. Alright, so here we are in game, and there's our radio relay helicopter we placed on the apron, and all we need to do now is jump in to our test slot, and tune the ATIS frequency, and we should hear it. So I'll let it run through once so you can hear it, and then we'll have a talk about it. So let's fly. Give it 4 seconds to load in, because that's what we set in our mission editor for time more than 4. That should be about right. And I have it tuned on COM2 channel 1, so let's tune it in and listen.
Sunrise at 0525 local time. Sunset at 2037 local time. Wind from 174 at 0 knots. Visibility 10 statute miles. Few clouds. Cloud base 8,200. Ceiling 8,900 feet. Temperature 16 degrees Celsius. Dew point 6 degrees Celsius. Altimeter QNH 29.95. QFE 28.34 inches of mercury. Active runway 32. Advise on initial contact. You have information. Echo. Vaziani Airport.
Okay, so there it is running through once. Let's just detune it. And obviously it will change depending on what the wind and the QNH is set in the mission editor. I'm looking forward to a more dynamic environment with weather, and it will just keep updating as it goes. So there's a look at something really simple, Ops ATIS. Great to add a bit of immersion into your missions. Thanks for watching.